Bum, 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 dun, 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 dun. Ba-da-da-da-da. All right, hello everyone. We're live. We're here to talk about the Great Empire of the Dawn and wormy worms like this boy over here. It's Dracomorph theory time. We're actually here to talk about basically all things having to do with the darkest magic of Valyria, linking it to the Great Empire of the Dawn, and tying that into the creation of the Blood of the Dragon. And yes, the Blood of the Dragon, meaning both the creation of dragons, the creation of the Valyrian people, or the Blood of the Dragon people who are able to bond with dragons. So that's what we're talking about. Hey, Elisa Patience. Hey, friends. Asher's Trueborn son dropping in. Yep, just getting started. Haven't missed nothing. And yes, I wore a shirt with a tiny bit of green in it, so it has the effect of making me transparent. Oh, I've got holes in me. Oh, yes, green screen technology. It's magical. I did see a super chat roll in before it even popped up. The Nanomator. Here it is. Just an excitement super chat. Thank you very much, Nanomator. Nice name, too. That's cool. So today, like I said, we're going to talk about some really freaky things. And hopefully the internet connection will hold up. I'm in a remote mountain abode in California, and I do not have the fastest internet connection as I used to, but just let me know if it gets choked or completely locked up or something like this. And yes, I'm holy. Yes, that's it. That is the joke. I knew it was there somewhere. Paul the Bard, why didn't you come up with that first? As a linguist. Anyways, thank you. Thanks for everyone for coming, guys. So, like I said, we're going to talk about some dark stuff. I figured it'd be a good topic for a night stream. I do try to vary up the times of all this so that different people from different time zones can make it. We've got not only the US and the European time zone, but we've also got a strong Australia contingent. Some of whom might be watching this early Monday morning right now. So thank you for watching live. And if you're watching on the replay, thanks a lot. You probably wait for me to get down to business. So let's get down to business. And so George R.R. Martin, guys, he loves to hint at dark sorcery without telling us enough to spoil the mystery. It's one of the hallmarks of his low fantasy magic writing approach. Low magic fantasy writing approach, rather. There is high magic in A Song of Ice and Fire, but it's kept around the margins, and it always serves the centerpiece of the story, which is the characters' hearts in conflict. How many times have you heard George say that, right? George is, however, totally into leaving breadcrumbs of world building for us to follow, and he loves to hint at more powerful magic lurking just out of sight. For example, Valyria was a 5,000-year-old empire, or 5,000-year long running empire that was built on powerful sorcery, but they're gone now. And Dany only has a small fraction of their magical capabilities as of yet. I do think she'll be getting those glass candles in the next book, but as I said, a great deal of powerful magic did occur, but just around the margins or in the past. So, for example, at the time of the Long Night Cataclysm itself was almost certainly brought down by humans practicing dark magic. And at a time before the Long Night, and the time before the Long Night, which was known as the Dawn Age, of course, it seems to have been a time where magic thrived pretty much out in the open, everywhere. So the tales of the Great Empire of the Dawn follow this track. They were some sort of Atlantis-like or Numenor-like high civilization whose practice of sorcery eventually came to bite them in the butt, if you will. They disappeared into the smoke of the Long Night, leaving behind only their few stone fortresses and some scattered myths in the further east. At least that's the official record, but of course, we've discovered the fingerprints of this Stone Age empire, which can be found all over the world as the surviving peoples of that large multi-ethnic empire. Very important point to note. I sort of skipped over that in my first Great Empire of the Dawn video, but they were a multi-ethnic empire. They, any empire that large is gonna involve different tribes of people or whatever. And when they broke apart, we saw a whole bunch of different people sort of go their own way. So definitely think of the Great Empire of the Dawn like the Roman Empire. It's going to have encompassed many different ethnicities and races or tribes or however you want to say it. So The most important of these scatterings is going to be the people who came to Westeros. And in my next scripted Great Empire of the Dawn video, which is about halfway done, or it's almost done, I'll just say, it's getting there. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about all the clues that the Great Empire of the Dawn came to Westeros, Old Town, Battle Isle. Ultimately, all that stuff's going to lead up to the Long Night, the Last Hero, and the defeat of the others in Westeros. But today, we're going to tackle another very important child of the Great Empire, if you will, the one who inherited more of their sorcery than anyone else. That would, of course, be Valyria. And not only are we going to show the lines of transmission between the Great Empire of the Dawn and Valyria, we are also going to drill down into the guts of just how dark this dark sorcery was. And I do mean into the guts. Catherine Miller, new patron and new fan. I'm so excited to finally catch you live. Catherine, yes, I saw you sign up. I saw your message. And we've got to cook you up a patron name. They actually had a few signups in the last few weeks. Thanks, everyone. And I will be getting to you with very cool nicknames. If you've already sent me the info, if you haven't, send me cool information about yourself with which I can make a fun nickname. In any case, thanks a lot, guys. So before we go any further, I do want to give credit where credit is due and point you towards a pair of very cool videos on a YouTube channel called The Disputed Lands, which is run by Crowfood's daughter. She's not actually making or not actively making videos anymore or at the current time, but she does have a few videos on her channel which are all mind-blowing. And in particular, you need to watch two of them called The Secret Origin of Dragons, Part 1 and 2. And I will just drop a link in the chat right now for those, but of course they'll be in the description of the video as well. So that is part 1 there, and here's part 2. They are awesome. If you like my videos, you will love these videos. You probably like all of Crowfood's daughter's videos. But these two in particular are going to be, very much interwoven with the stuff we're going to be talking about today. Essentially, Crowfood's daughter is laying out the best proof, if you will, that Septon Barth was right about dragons having been bred from firewyrms and wyverns. Sorry. Sometimes I say wyverns. Wyverns. So this video today will build on some of her ideas, which in turn built on some of my ideas about the Great Empire of the Dawn and back, because, of course, Crowfood's daughter is one of the folks that goes all the way back to the Westeros.org forum days before I ever had a podcast. So we've been trading ideas for many years now. She was actually the person who first pointed out to me that Garth the Green looks a lot like this figure from European mythology called Cernunnos. I didn't even know who Cernunnos was at the time, if you can believe that. So many a fine tip has come from Crowfood's daughter. In any case, these videos, some of my favorite videos, and they complement the discussion we're about to have. So make sure you watch those after this one or, so yeah, if you haven't seen them already. I will refer to some of the points that she makes later today, but there's a lot more information in those videos than I can sum up. So definitely watch those. All right, so in the Great Empire of the Dawn, Dragon Lords of Ancient Ashai, we saw that there is a lot of evidence to support the idea that, well, the Great Empire of the Dawn was an ancient race of Dragon Lords from Ashai. Good title, right? I thought so. In any case, said another way, these were the ancestors of Valyria itself. Pretty much all of the evidence points to this. So consider the vision that Daenerys had in A Game of Thrones of the kingly ghosts with silver hair. Actually, they had hair of silver, gold, and platinum white. And they had gemstone eyes matching 4 of the 8 gemstones associated with the rulers of the Great Empire of the Dawn. They were holding swords of pale fire, if you remember, and urging Dany to wake the dragon. This vision shows us that the signature Valyrian looks, or blood of the dragon looks, hair of silver, gold, or platinum white, and purple eyes, were indeed found among the rulers of the Great Empire of the Dawn. Only one of these kingly ghosts had the purple eyes, but they all had the hair. So we can conclude that the Valyrians may simply be descended from one tribe or ruling dynasty of the Great Empire. Perhaps they're all related to the Amethyst Empress or the Amethyst Empress's tribe or what have you. I don't think the specifics are super important. I think it's the general idea that among these kingly ghosts we see, they all had this metallic hair and they had different color eyes, one of which was purple. That's the important thing. So the Gemstone Emperor ghosts are, of course, and is there a super chat that went by? Yes. Nope, I got that one. And sorry, guys. spare me. Thanks for indulging me. I just want to make sure I don't miss any. I always feel bad when I miss that. No, it looks like we're good. Okay. So the Gemstone Emperor ghosts are, of course, urging Dany to wake her dragon during her dream. And that makes sense, since they seem to have been the first dragon lords, right? The art of dragon taming itself is the biggest link between the Great Empire and Valyria. And we'll get into how the blood of the dragon bond was created later today. But it's important to realize that it's not just dragon taming, but the way that they use the dragons. Both the Great Empire and Valyria figured out how to make magically indestructible fused stone with their dragons and their sorcery. Rather, instead of thinking that they both separately discovered that same combination of magical techniques, it's more likely that these vanished dragon lords taught the Valyrians their arts, as the ancient Ashai texts assert. And it says, these Ashai histories say that a people so ancient they had no name first tamed dragons in the shadow and brought them to Valyria, teaching the Valyrians their arts before departing from the annals. It's a quote we all know well by now. But what I'm saying is that the fused stone used by both civilizations indicates that this claim is true, because fused stone making is a specific technique which makes sense as something that one culture would transmit to another. Okay, so what about Valyrian steel? The other highly advanced magical technology that the Valyrians developed with dragonfire and sorcery. Well, the swords of pale fire that the kingly gemstone ghosts hold obviously suggest Lightbringer. And Azor Ahai and Lightbringer also arise at the end of the Great Empire of the Dawn legend to put the darkness to rout and restore love and light to the world and all that. So here's the thing. When the Valyrians made their famous magic steel swords, they really seem to have just been following the legend of Lightbringer's forging, basically like a recipe. The language of the myth, and hat tip to Radio Westeros here, suggests a process of steel making. And here's the line from the actual Azor Ahai Lightbringer myth. It says, heat and hammer and fold, heat and hammer and fold. Oh yes, until the sword was done. So Valyrian steel is basically just a fantasy version of Damascus steel, which is also known as folded steel. This is emphasized in quotes such as this. When Jon turned it sideways, he could see the ripples in the dark steel where the metal had been folded back on itself again and again. This is Valyrian steel, my lord, he said wonderingly. His father had let him handle ice often enough. He knew the look and the feel. Jared. Okay, so I knew I missed a $10 super chat. J Lord, not Jared, J Lord. He sent in a $2 super chat to tell me that he sent in a $10 super chat. That's the kind of correction I like. Thank you. And if you have a question, J Lord, attached to that first one that I missed, just tag me in the chat here and I will grab it. In any case, the important thing to realize is that Azor Ahai failed to temper Lightbringer twice. And he only succeeded when he used Nissa Nissa's Heartblood, poor Nissa Nissa, on his third attempt. And as I always love to point out, this is one of the big clues that Azor Ahai was probably no hero and may have in fact been the villain of the Long Night, may have been the Bloodstone Emperor himself. But that aside, the point here is to observe that Lightbringer was an unbreakable magic sword forged with evil, spooky blood magic. It's consecrated by taking somebody's life, if you will. That's likely true of Valyrian steel as well. And this is hinted at in a few passages from the World of Ice and Fire concerning the Cohoric Smith's ability to rework Valyrian steel. And it says, the properties of Valyrian steel are well known and are the result of both folding iron many times to balance and remove impurities and the use of spells, or at least arts we do not know, to give unnatural strength to the resulting steel. Those arts are now lost, though the smiths of Qohor claim to still know magics for reworking Valyrian steel without losing its strength or unsurpassed ability to hold an edge. Indeed, Tobo Mott, the armorer and smith in King's Landing that we encounter in A Game of Thrones, confirms this. Ned's inner monologue is summarizing the things Tobo has told him, and it says, Tobo had learned to work Valyrian steel at the forges of Qohor as a boy. Only a man who knew the spells could take old weapons and forge them anew. So, reworking Valyrian steel requires knowledge of spells as well as metalworking. That's one of the reasons why I don't think that the maesters of the Citadel can actually rework Valyrian steel, although I see that idea popping up lately. And let me just sort of throw a little shade on that real quick, because to me this is kind of silly. Okay, so people are thinking that because the Maester's chains, sometimes have links of Valyrian steel, if you study sorcery, that the Citadel must be able to melt those links so that they can attach them to the chain, right? Or maybe they need to make new links from like a supply of Valyrian steel they bought sometime. But to me, this is kind of silly. So think about this. It makes far more sense to simply open the links of the chain next to the Valyrian link instead. Like the links made of steel, the links made of steel forged with sorcery that are unbreakable. Those would be the last ones that you would try to open. You'd open the ones made of gold or copper or iron or basically anything else other than Valyrian steel, and then attach those to the Valyrian steel links. So there's no need to open the Valyrian steel links, and they probably just bought them as they were from Valyria, because we know that the Citadel had commerce with Valyria for a long time. That's where they got the glass candles and stuff. So yeah, I don't think the Citadel can rework Valyrian steel unless they hire a Cohoric smith, which of course they could, because we do see that Tobo Mott can in fact rework Valyrian steel. But in any case, just sorry, get off my high horse there. How do I tag a chat? Yes, mine had a question. So all you do, J Lord, is you put the @ sign and then you start typing Lucifer means Lightbringer. You only need to get like 3 letters out and it will pop up with a suggestion. You can tag anybody in the YouTube chat that way just by typing the @ sign and a couple letters of their name. That lights it up for me and makes it easier to see. Or if I miss it, to Baal the Bard or one of the other mods will grab it and throw it at me. So Baal the Bard has the question. Here it comes. Drum roll, please. I think there were 3 long nights, and that of the Empire, the one that the Emperor... Oh, let me put it up on the screen here. The one the Emperor's grandchildren, the Starks, the Gardeners, the Royces, the Blackwoods dealt with, and that of the 13th Lord Commander, first man from UT. Okay, so that is probably a bit of a side topic to tackle into. I do know that some people like the multiple long night theory. I don't tend to be a fan of it. I don't think it's needed. It's definitely possible. This whole thing could be cyclical, especially if it's a comet thing. Maybe it comes around every once in a while and sprinkles meteors down. But I don't see any strong hints that there is more than one long night. I do think everything is tied to the one long night as far as the timeline goes. Most of the people who suggest more than one long night are trying to resolve some sort of timeline wonkiness based on a theory about the Andals or something like that. And I don't tend to buy those theories myself. But I don't have strong feelings about it, so don't take that as like any sort of condemnation of that idea. I do think multiple long nights is possible. I just don't think it's something that like we need to figure out in order to understand like what's going on. So that's probably what I'd say. Final water break. So yes, I would assume Sean O'Donnell's asking, do the Maesters have a cache of Valyrian steel links? That's what I would say, is that they have a bunch of links. You know, they went and bought the links from the smiths that could make them, and then so they had the links. And if they need to rework it, then they would hire a Cohoric smith. And that's, I don't know, that's all seems to make the most sense to me. And I'll also point out that the Maesters not very many of them study sorcery, so they don't need many Valyrian steel links. Maester Lewin has one, and it's kind of rare. So really, they only need a few. Yeah. All right. So Valyrian steel, the point is, it needs magic to reshape, let alone to forge. What kind of magic? Well, all Valyrian magic is rooted in blood and fire, as Marwyn the Mage says. And looking to the legend of Lightbringer, the answer would seem to be forging a steel sword in fire and then adding blood sacrifice. Tempering the sword in blood, perhaps, just like Azor Ahai. That's what the Cohoric Smiths seem to think is the key, apparently. And it says, this is from the World of Ice and Fire, Maester Paul's treatise on Cohoric metalworking, written during several years of residence in the free city of Cohor, reveals just how jealously the secrets are guarded. He was thrice publicly whipped and cast out from the city for making too many inquiries. The final time his hand was also removed following the allegation that he stole a Valyrian steel blade. According to Paul, the true reason for his final exile was his discovery of blood sacrifices, including the killing of slaves as young as infants, which the Cohoric Smiths used in their efforts to produce a steel to equal that of the freehold. Well then, so that's kind of the big clue there. You know, the people that have come the closest to rediscovering the art of Valyrian steelmaking are pretty sure that you need to use blood magic. And of course, Cohor is just the sort of place for this. It's known as the City of Sorcerers. It's widely believed that the dark arts are practiced there: divination, blood magic, necromancy. They do blood sacrifice to the black goat. Usually it's animals, but sometimes it's criminals. And when the city is under threat, the rich, wealthy people of the city sacrifice their own children on the altars of the black goat to placate the gods. So, yes, blood magic all over the place here. J-Lord piping in again says, I think the Starks are the children of the Pearl Emperor with their gray eyes. So I think you might be giving a shout out to the Starks Are Not First Men theory from Westeros.org by Lord Too Fat, which is a really cool theory you can look up. But yeah, like I said, that's kind of a side topic. I probably can't get into the whole debate about that right now because I do have a lot of script to get through. But, you know, we will eventually get around to talking about the Starks and the Last Hero at some point. So, like I said, Valyrian steelmaking seems to involve dragonfire, sorcery, and blood sacrifice. And in this, they seem to be trying to recreate the process of forging a Lightbringer. That makes perfect sense if the Valyrians learned their sorcery from the great empire of the Dawn, from whence came both the tale of Lightbringer and those pale fire swords of the gemstone Emperor ghosts. Now, Valyrians had other bits of sorcery that we hear of, namely glass candles and dragonbinder horns. The horns don't really have any clues that lead us to Ashai or the great empire of the Dawn, apart from the possibility that Euron could be lying about obtaining his horn and Valyrian steel armor in Valyria. Some have proposed that those things might be more easily acquired in Ashai than doomed to Valyria, but of course that's really only speculation. Glass candles, however, are another story. As we discussed in the Church of Starry Wisdom livestream a couple weeks ago, the Bloodstone Emperor is remembered as founding the Church of Starry Wisdom, and the two people using glass candles show strong signs of being Starry Wisdom devotees. I'm talking about Marwyn and Quaithe, of course, who have both spent years studying magic in Ashai. Both Marwyn and Quaithe believe that Daenerys Targaryen is, or may be, the promised savior who could defeat the others, which, among other things, indicates that the Church of Starry Wisdom is, you know, up to date on all things related to dragons, Azor Ahai, and the associated magic and lore. Let's see here.
Marvin Martin says, calling hybrids abominations is speciesist. LOL.
Well, wait till you get to my explanation for how they were made, and then you'll understand why it is an abomination. Ben C says, just wanted to say how much I've enjoyed your videos, especially during the pandemic. Thank you so much for your time and creativity. You're quite welcome. Very cool. Dr. Manhattan Avatar. Big fan of the new Watchmen series, of course. So, it's by no means conclusive, but these links between Starry Wisdom Church, glass candles, Ashai, and the Dragon Lord that was promised prophecy suggest that the use of glass candles, like the art of taming dragons, forging magic swords, and making fused stone, may have been taught to the Valyrians by the people from ancient Ashai. In A Clash of Kings, we even learned that dragon glass can actually be found in the hills near Ashai, which is confirmed by the maesters in the World of Ice and Fire. So if we have dragon lords and magic swords and fused stone going on, there also happens to be a bunch of dragon glass close by. Well, seems likely the glass candle thing started here too, I would say. All right, so here is a section break. And let me just check and see. Super chat, thank you, Baal the Bard. Let me just scroll back up and see. Okay. Didelphimorphia. Yeah, that's a cool name. Links between Ashai and Valyria, origin of dragons, my favorite topic. Thanks for this live stream. No question, just keep going, please. Well, thank you very much for the encouragement. I'm hopped up on caffeine and super chats, and I've got the stamina to get through this entire script. And I did kind of pack in the script. I was like feverishly writing today, right up until I hit go live. So I've even got a couple quotes I didn't have time to stick in there that I'm gonna have to grab on the spot. So it's packed. It's packed. Thank you. And then, as like I said, there's even more information in Crowfood's daughter's videos, which I could only quickly sum up here. So big topic, trying to figure out how the blood of the dragon was created. It's a really big mystery. You know, of all the mysteries in A Song of Ice and Fire, this is a pretty good one. So let's see here. So now we come to the heart of darkness with all this evil sorcery. Human-animal crossbreeds. Human-animal hybrids. It was passing hilarious when George Bush Jr., tell me how many of you remember this, warned about the dangers of human-animal hybrids in that one famous State of the Union speech. But this is no laughing matter, folks. Here is the account of the slave colony of Gorgassos from the World of Ice and Fire. The largest of the basilisks is the Isle of Tears, where the steep-sided valleys and black bogs hide amongst rugged flint hills and twisted windswept rocks. On its southern coast stand the broken ruins of a city. Founded by the old empire of Gis, it was known as Gorgai for close to 2 centuries, or perhaps 4. There was some dispute until the Dragon Lords captured it in the Third Giscari War and renamed it Gorgassos. By any name, it was an evil place. The Dragon Lords sent their worst criminals to the Isle of Tears to live out their lives in hard labor. The dungeons of Gorgassos, in the dungeons of Gorgassos, torturers devised new torments. In the flesh pits, blood sorcery of the darkest sort was practiced, as beasts were mated to slave women to bring forth twisted, half-human children. Indeed, human-animal hybrids absolutely are a thing. This is not just like, tall tales here. Evidence abounds for the existence, of course, of the squishers, or the deep ones, or some sort of fish people. They're all over the place. We have the legends of stagmen in Westeros that we all know and love, both Garth the Green and the Sacred Order of Green Men. And then, of course, the Children of the Forest themselves seem to be humanoids with many animal traits. They have cat eyes and black claws, 4-fingered hands, and dappled skin like a doe. And as we look around the margins of Planetos, we find all kinds of weird stuff that sound like human-animal hybridization. So east of the 5 forts, we hear of, quote, men who soar like eagles on leathern wings, bloodless men, and half-human creatures with green-scaled skin and venomous bites called lizard men or shrikes. These last sound somewhat similar to the green-skinned people of the Thousand Islands, who are, quote, hairless people with green-tinged skin who file their teeth and worship squamous fish-headed gods. I'm sorry, I don't know all my Lovecraft adjectives. In any case, over on Sithorios, we then hear about the brindled men, which seem kind of like George's version of like very aggressive Neanderthals, but not quite. They aren't necessarily human-animal hybrids, although the brindled patterns on their skin are described as being hog-like, so, maybe. But there are rumors of other hybrids on Sithorios. And it says, some say that there were other races here once, forgotten peoples destroyed, devoured, or driven out by the brindled men. Tales of lizard men, lost cities, and eyeless cave dwellers are commonplace. No proof exists for any of these, say the maesters. Ashura's trueborn son says, does dawn imply founding at the end of the long night? Well, I think that the name of the sword Dawn definitely implies that it has something to do with the end of the long night. There's all kinds of cool wordplay, though. We talked about, the idea that Darkstar might steal Dawn. Well, stealing Dawn is a very good analog or way of describing, metaphorically, the long night. The sun doesn't come up, so you've stolen the dawn, right? Of course, that when the sun does rise, you say that dawn breaks. The last hero's sword broke, the first one, and then he got a new sword. So I'm not sure quite how the sword breaking comes in. But yes, the name Dawn is ripe for punnery and wordplay. And I do think that when it's all come together, we're going to see a few through lines like that. Lucifer means Lightbringer. I wondered if the brindled men is a reference to chimeras in which can cause skin striping like tigers. And how would that fit in? I guess that's something that the chimeras could be the result of more blood experiments, right? Yes, it could be. And of course, there's brindled wyverns too on Sithorios. So yeah, we're going to get into that as well. So these other races, brindled men, lizard men, eyeless cave dwellers, they may be on Sithorios. They're commonplace, these tales. So maybe there's something to them, right? I mean, what's interesting is that we have lizard men east of the 5 forts and lizard men in Sithorios. So that may be, again, more than one tale that agrees is always something we should pay attention to. And the eyeless cave dwellers are interesting because they indicate some sort of divergent evolution. We'll come back to that. And what's interesting to me about these various freak shows of ice and fire are the places in which they're found. The Thousand Islands are in the Shivering Sea on the border of the Great Empire of the Dawn territory in the north. The winged men and lizard men of the far east are similarly pressing right on the borders of the Great Empire. And Sithorios Well, that's a whole nother can of worms. That's a worm joke. J-Lord hitting me up today with all the super chats. Thanks, buddy. Blood sacrifices and mating slaves to beat all anti-Valyrian and therefore anti-Targaryen lies by the Grey Rats. Ah, the Valyrians were not so evil. No, I disagree, J-Lord. The Valyrians were definitely evil. I mean, you can't get around the slave mines. They fed entire nations, thousands and possibly millions of people into the slave mines. They definitely practiced blood magic. And as we're going to see, this stuff about Gogossos is probably true too. So would have to respectfully disagree. I think the Valyrians were absolutely evil. But what's cool is that the Targaryens should not be placed in the same boat. And in fact, if you've checked out my video about the Doom was an inside job, I'm proposing that Aenar Targaryen, the founder of House Targaryen in Westeros, actually helped engineer the Doom. And in part 2 of that video, I'm going to propose an idea that Ball the Bard and I came up with on our Doom live stream, basically in finished form, which is that Aenar Targaryen might have had altruistic motives. He may have been trying to end the evils of the Valyrian Empire by participating in the Doom with the Faceless Men. So there is, I mean, I definitely agree that there is, maester bias, and there are people trying to slander the Targaryens, but the Valyrians, they were actually evil. I'm pretty sure. So yes, thank you for the super chats. Now, so Sothorios, right? Sothorios, this is where it's going to get freaky deaky. Sothorios is potentially linked to the Great Empire of the Dawn because of the oily black stone, right? And I can actually change my background. I'm going to come back to this one because I like it. However, I do have a Yin background, so let's use that for a second. The oily black stone, all right? Ashai is made of oily black stone, but so is the ancient cursed city of Yin behind me in the jungles of Sothorios, where I am live streaming from with surprisingly good internet here in Sothorios. And of course, so is the giant carved toad idol, which gives the Isle of Toads its name. The only other confirmed oily black stone we have is the Sea Stone Chair, which is, of course, linked to Squishers and Deep Ones, which means that Sothorios has 2 of the 4 confirmed oily black stone locations. As you recall, Ashai is not only made of oily black stone, it's the largest city in the world. So it's a lot of oily black stone there. And I tend to think that anything made of oily black stone or any other place where we find oily black stone is potentially linked to Ashai. Not only because there's more of it there than anywhere else, but because of clues like the cursed shadow hanging over the entire peninsula, the blighted and magically toxic land, and of course the tale of the Bloodstone Emperor's black meteor. All of these things make me think that Ashai is the origin, the source for all this oily black stone. As I wet my whistle here. And that live stream with Ball the Bard about the Doom, the link has just been dropped in the chat. I will try to remember to add that to the description. It's found on my channel right at the top. That was a very good one. That was an awesome live jam session. We started off with one conclusion and ended in a totally different place by the time we were done working it out. So definitely a fun live workshopping episode there. Now, let's see here. I think it's also important to notice that Gogossos, that Valyrian human-animal hybrid abomination factory, is basically right next to the Isle of Toads with its oily black stone idol and its fish people with webbed hands and feet. I'm not saying that oily stone turns humans into mutant freaks, although it's not impossible, right? But what I am saying is that the oily stone indicates a link between Sothorios and the great empire of the Dawn, ancient Ashai, if you will, and it's a link made of very dark sorcery. I also think that it's clear that human-animal hybrid stuff didn't begin with the Valyrians at Gogossos, and that it was something they learned from the great empire of the Dawn. So consider what we're told about the Bloodstone Emperor. He practiced dark arts, torture, necromancy, took a tiger woman for his bride. Tiger woman is interesting, right? She may be a child of the forest, or she may be a Langi god empress, as I've proposed a few times. But she might also be something else. Maybe she's a real sort of cat woman, a human-animal hybrid of some kind. But setting Tiger Woman aside, it's very easy to picture Bloodstone Emperor using his dark arts and blood magic, and maybe his magic space rock, to create human-animal hybrids. In fact, and here comes the tinfoil. Actually, let me grab the super chat from Maud Mary before I do the tinfoil. Could the wall have some oily blackstone under all that ice? Yes, it could. My hunch would be fused blackstone before oily blackstone, because that would be a cool way to tie the Dragon Lords of the Great Empire of the Dawn all the way up to the fight against the others and the Night's Watch and the Long Night. So that would be my cross your fingers and hope for blackstone under the wall. But yes, it could be oily stone too. Mary, I think it's more likely we could find an oily blackstone either on the Isle of Faces or at the Heart of Winter, because, yeah, the oily blackstone is super evil. And so it makes sense as something that's at the epicenter of the Heart of Winter, perhaps corrupting the weirwoods or something like that. So here comes the tinfoil. Like I said, what if all of these nasty beasties, like the winged men, the lizard men, and even the brindled men, are nothing more than the freaky experiments of the Bloodstone Emperor? What if Sithorios, which is clearly meant to mirror Africa in geography, if nothing else, it's exactly on the part of the map where Africa would be in relation to, Essos as Europe and stuff. And I also think George is sort of playing on the old European fear of Africa as the dark continent and all that stuff with sort of myths that were all running around with Sithorios. But what if Sithorios actually used to be a habitable place, but then was just overrun by the monsters of the Bloodstone Emperor? What if Sithorios, if you will, is the Bloodstone Emperor's island of Dracomorph? There's actually a potential clue about this in the history of the Summer Isles. It says, Lomas Longstrider, who visited the Summer Isles in his search for wonders, recorded that the sages of the Isles claimed that their ancestors once reached the western shores of Sithorios and founded cities there, only to have them overwhelmed and destroyed by the same forces that wiped out later Giscari and Valyrian settlements on that perilous continent. The Citadel's archives hold a few ancient chronicles of Valyria, but none of them speak of these supposed cities, and there are maesters who cast doubts on the truth of these claims. So, the Giscari and Valyrian settlements on Sithorios date back like 5,000 years. So the maesters are crediting these Summer Isles legends to very remote history, even if they do cast doubt on their veracity. But what if this legend is not only somewhat true, but actually flipped around? What if these legends of ancient colonies on Sithorios could actually be memories of the original home of the Summer Islanders? They remember being chased away by monsters. Maybe that was actually where they first came from. I mean, to put it sort of bluntly, it would make a certain amount of sense if instead of all the black people in A Song of Ice and Fire having originated from a small set of islands, like the Hawaiian Islands equivalent, they actually came from the Africa parallel continent. I mean, that would make a certain amount of sense, right? So think about this, right? Wherever Martin is imagining the first humans to have evolved, and Martin is showing us many signs of evolution. We have smart apes and things all over the world. Clearly, we have regular evolution and magical evolution happening here. So wherever the first humans evolved here, it wouldn't have been on a tiny island, just as on Earth. So at some point, the ancestors of the Summer Isles must have come there by boat. And again, thinking about our own history, mankind evolved in Africa and then spread out at multiple times and places. So is it possible that the Summer Islanders actually came from Sithorios only to have their homeland overrun by monsters? It's possible, yes. And I can see not wanting to go back, having found the Summer Isles, which are totally sweet. And actually a lot bigger than Hawaii, if you look at them on the map. So a couple of super chats. Let me just grab these. J-Lord, once again, I think Storm's End is proof that the first men came from the Empire of the Dawn as much as the Valyrians. So the thing is, Storm's End is not made of fused stone, though. It's made out of, it says that the joints between the blocks are so tight you can't fit a knife in, but it's not fused stone. So I know that there's the old story of the children turning the stone to liquid to help Durin make the castle, but that's clearly not what is there. We have blocks that are fit together. It's just done very cunningly. I do think that it could be evidence of just generally advanced masonry, which could have come from the Great Empire of the Dawn, but it is not fused stone. So it wouldn't be the kind of smoking gun evidence that we have at Battle Isle. What I think is maybe even more interesting about Storm's End, J-Lord, is that the spells that are set into the walls that shadows cannot pass through. That's exactly the same as the wall up north, where the shadows cannot pass because of spells. And so that tells us that Storm's End is a Dawn Age place, or at least a Long Night place. It's older than the Andals, you know, like the Maesters say. So Storm's End, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if there was like fused stone underneath, but I just don't understand why George would hide it beneath like regular masonry. If there was an original fused stone structure, I think that would just be the castle there. But something definitely is up with Storm's End, so I will give you that. The recovering DJ, 2765. It seems like a very specific number. Wonder what's behind that. No question, just thrilled to say you're on Sundays again. The recovering DJ coming to you live from radio station Q2765. That's my DJ radio voice. Oh, it's Synchronous. That's a patron of mine. Thanks, buddy. Good to see you around. All right. Storm's End is made of space age titanium. All right. Well, the Storm's End, we have to do a whole Storm's End stream sometime, I guess. I do have thoughts, but so getting back to Sothorios and this weird idea about maybe the Summer Islanders come from Sothorios. I mean, like I said, it does make a certain amount of sense because it's almost impossible that they would have that humans would have evolved on a small set of islands. They would have come from somewhere else at some point by boat. So, Elisa Patience relaying a question from John Weaver: Valyrian magic and animal hybrids. What if the eggs were always stone? What was Dany's first baby deformed, or was it a dragon not birthed in flame? I don't understand the second part of the question. We are told that dragon eggs turn to stone over time. They're also described as kind of stony to begin with, so it's hard to say if maybe they're not always stone. But I feel like maybe that question needs maybe clarify what you're trying to ask about Dany's baby. We are going to talk about the deformed lizard babies. That is coming. So, all right. So the list of the sins, the Bloodstone Emperor is growing longer, right? Maybe he ruined an entire continent with his blood magic crossbreeding program. Yikes. Just as the Valyrians conducted their experiments safely away from their homeland on Gagassos, Bloodstone Emperor or his predecessors may have used Sothorios or the various islands of the Jade Sea for this purpose. And of course, those islands are inhabited by things like basilisks, which are another magical hybrid creature, you know, a chimera creature. Now, as freaky as all that tinfoil is, the bottom line here is really pretty simple. Human-animal crossbreeding has occurred somehow in the world of Ice and Fire. We have many examples of it, so we know it happened. And seemingly it happened before the Valyrians did their thing at Gagassos. Most crucially, the primary important magic that we can trace from Valyria all the way back to the Great Empire, which would be the art of taming and bonding with dragons, almost certainly involves human-animal crossbreeding. So check out this quote. Sheltered there amidst the great volcanic mountains known as the 14 Flames were the Valyrians, who learned to tame dragons and make them the most fearsome weapon of war that the world ever saw. The tales the Valyrians told of themselves claimed they were descended from dragons and were kin to the ones they now controlled. Kin to the ones they now controlled. The proof here is in the lizard babies. Dany's lizard baby, Rhaenyra and Daemon Targaryen's lizard baby, Maegor's lizard babies, and so on. You don't you don't get like half reptilian lizard babies without some sort of reptilian DNA. It's just not something that happens in the real world. So, for example, Maegor's malformed children were sometimes born without eyes or limbs, which makes them very worm-like. And Crowfood's daughter, in her videos, makes an interesting comparison to a malformed dragon hatchling that we hear about in Fire and Blood. And it says, the first omen of the dark times to come was seen upon Driftmark, when the dragon's egg presented to Laena Velaryon upon her birth quickened and hatched. Her parents' pride and pleasure quickly turned to ash, however. The dragon that wriggled from the egg was a monstrosity, a wingless worm, maggot white and blind. Within moments of hatching, the creature turned upon the babe in her cradle and tore a bloody chunk from her arm. As Laena shrieked, Lord Oakenfist ripped the dragon off her, flung it to the floor, and hacked it to pieces. I got a super chat with no question attached. Thank you. I will just say thank you. Let's see here. So Crowfood's daughter's explanation of this is that this worm born from a dragon's egg is essentially reverting to the DNA of one of its genetic parents, the firewyrm. Remember, the idea is that firewyrms and wyverns were crossed to create dragons. And so we have this malformed dragon, and it's showing us worminess, you know? And I agree. It seems very clear to me. So it's interesting to note that unlike the baby dragons placed in the Targaryen cradles, this creature instantly attacks the child, Laena, who does turn out to be a dragon rider, by the way. Now, Crowfood's daughter does a great job in her videos going through all the examples and showing how these Targaryen lizard baby abominations or malformations or whatever are all manifesting traits of worms and wyverns, such as tiny wings, a lack of eyes or limbs, scales, and a tail. Deformed dragons also show traits of worms, and all of this points very convincingly towards two related truths. Firewyrms and wyverns were somehow combined to create dragons, and the race of people known as the blood of the dragon does in fact have some amount of reptilian lizard DNA in their veins. They are lizard people, folks. So the remaining question, and the one I'm going to try to answer with the rest of this video, is how, exactly how was the DNA of one animal combined with another or with humans? The answer is Dracomorph. So, did I miss a super chat? I've got a question being relayed to me from the helpful Alba Bard. This comes from Nicola Gibson. Genetic engineering, spider DNA in goats. Similar techniques by the Great Empire create and bond with dragons. Valyria uses inbreeding. Okay, so one thing about the super chat, very short limit in characters, so it's sometimes a little challenging to cram the whole idea into one question. Let me see if I can figure out what this is. Yeah, I need a little clarification. I do think that the Dragon Bond was created in the Great Empire of the Dawn. I mean, that's kind of what we're leading up to here, what we're saying. And so I do think that the Valyrians practiced inbreeding both to control and monopolize the Dragon Bond and to preserve the magical ability or whatever. If there's a further question, then yeah, try to clarify for me if you could. All right, so let's see here. Alicia Kingston, hey there. All right, so Dracomorph theory. Let me grab a drink real quick here. How many people do we have? Oh, look, we got 410 people. Only 10 people away from 420. That's excellent. Thank you, everyone. It makes me feel, it fills me with joy. What can I say? It is very surreal. If I could just be like totally serious, I know I kid around all the time, but the fact that 400 of y'all are watching as I talk about my ideas of A Song of Ice and Fire is very heartwarming and fulfilling. It is, all I can say is thank you. And I try to honor your belief in me with more entertaining tinfoil and stuff. So there you go. Now, everybody remembers the popular sci-fi horror movie Alien. And I'm going to go back to my other... sorry to keep stopping here. I want to get the other background on. It was looking so nice. I like it. There we go. Boop. Talking about wormies again. So... Ghoul City. By the way, a ghoul is a technical term for people who eat the dead. And there are, as well as brindled men in Sathorios, there's brindled ghouls, which just means brindled men that eat the dead, which is something that is said of them. Ghoul City says, I'm watching this from the side of the expressway because my engine overheated. Dude, well, be safe. Hope you're pulled, well, safely away from the road. Yeah, fingers crossed. AAA gets there soon for you, buddy. But I'm happy to help make this little time a little bit less painful for you. So there you go. Thanks for the super chats. Which lasting religion has the most apparent connections to hybrid peoples? I don't know. I don't think it's a religion, really. I think the key is the blood magic as opposed to any religion. It's really it's really about we're trying to trace the technique, I think, more than the religion. The religions end up following the magical powers in this, in this story. But I mean, I guess I would say the Church of Starry Wisdom. I don't know if you saw the Starry Wisdom video from 2 weeks ago, but we definitely went in on the Starry Wisdom Church and how it may have connections to Relorism and potentially even the Faith of the Seven. In any case, everybody remembers Aliens, right? Its sequel, the movie Alien was the first one. Then we had Aliens, Aliens 3 Resurrection, Alien versus Predator, and a pyramid under Antarctica. And then there was Prometheus and a movie after Prometheus, all kinds of stuff. So the main star of these movies, besides the amazing Sigourney Weaver, is the alien, of course, and it's known as a xenomorph. It's a kind of parasitic creature that seems to be able to combine with the DNA of its host to constantly create new hybrid species, all of which are extremely terrifying, right? So there's a delightfully horrific mechanism by which I believe the human-animal hybridization in A Song of Ice and Fire occurs, and I believe that George is borrowing from Aliens. Yes, so let me explain. In fact, I think it's all but certain that this is what's happening when you read Fire and Blood. He's not only drawing from the approximate feeling of some of the scenes in Aliens, he's actually showing us some of the techniques. So check this out. As I was saying, the deformed Targaryen babies and deformed dragons are all showing us hints of worm DNA. As we read a moment ago, beasts were mated to slave women to bring forth twisted half-human children by the Valyrians Ekogossos. But we have to ask, mated as in intercourse, right? I mean, I suppose maybe you could sprinkle dark magic onto bestiality and imagine that it leads to hybrid offspring. But somehow I don't think that this is what George is imagining here. It just seems a little too straightforward. This is more like what the common folk, if you will, the common folk would think of to explain the idea of human-animal hybrids. But it doesn't seem like something that would actually work, even with magic mixed in. I mean, how does one make a firewyrm mate with a wyvern, for example? How much Barry White do you have to play to set the mood for that? I mean, it's a little hard to picture, right? And you shouldn't try, I don't think either. And it's obviously impossible for a human to a dragon, if you'll excuse my French. So I think there has to be some other mechanism, guys. I don't think it's the old in-out. I don't think that's the answer. I do think the blood mages were experimenting with crossbreeding on Gorgai/Gogossos, but I think the methods were actually even darker and more twisted than what is imagined here. And like I said, I think it comes from Aliens. I'm glad you guys are enjoying this. I'm trying to play it up. If the DNA was manipulated through an RNA virus vector, and we got a scientist on here. Valyrians sought their heat resistance to aid in the progress of the disease to birth dragons. Why are the eggs even a thing? Well, it's a complex process. I would say, Ross, that by the time you're done listening to this theory and checking out Crowfood's daughter's videos, you'll understand the exact set of mechanisms that we're proposing here. The eggs, I mean, the dragons are born from the eggs. So clearly that's a thing. The Valyrian heat resistance is very important, though, and it does come into all of this. Hey, Bulwer the Purple. Nice to see you. Nice to see you. And yes, aliens. But not those kind of aliens. Not the visitors, not the ancient astronauts. We're talking about the extra slimy mouth within a mouth. Aliens. Those are the ones. So in Aliens, the main aliens that we see are terrifying. They're a little taller than humans. They got the big black semicircle like heads, and they got the whip tails, and all kinds of bad killer features like claws and melty slime spit, the mouth within a mouth. They're rolling balls of death. And then we find the female. Those are the males. The female's even bigger. That's the queen mother alien, which is huge. Like some sort of mother of an ant colony or wasp colony, right? She lays these huge eggs, which are like the size of wine barrels. And from those eggs hatch not baby aliens, but of course the nasty little things we call the face huggers, right? Now, to me, the face huggers are more nightmarish than the actual xenomorphs. And I'm probably not alone there. They look like a bony cross between a scorpion and a manta ray. A slimy, sticky one, of course, with a body just big enough to cover your face and a bunch of nasty, skittery legs to wrap around your head and give you absolutely no chance of escaping while they ram their secret ovipositor down your throat and deposit the little alien spawn in your guts. Egads. And somehow the worst is yet to come, right? You've got a baby alien in your belly, and remember, it's growing fast. We all know the alien, of course, tears its way out of your stomach after a day or so, which is, again, horrifying. It's actually no worse than a lot of the stuff that happens in actual nature, which is famously red in tooth and claw and ovipositor, as is well known. It is known. But try to remember, if you will, the first time you saw the movie Alien. Hopefully, if you saw the first movie first before you saw the other ones. Because in the first movie, they slow walk all of this horror. The one guy gets the face hugger treatment. He kind of recovers, though. He wakes up eventually, and nobody knows what's going to happen next. We haven't seen any of the aliens yet. We don't know that the face hugger has laid an egg in the guy's stomach. But then he's not feeling well, and we're looking at his distended belly. And then comes perhaps the most terrifying moment of the movie, the moment that you can see something moving inside of him. That horror is followed by the alien bursting forth from his chest cavity, and the moviegoer is now terrified and repulsed and fascinated all at the same time. It's the magical triumvirate of horror movies, right? So this is the kind of emotional beat in a story that leaves an impression on the viewer, to say the least. And if the viewer is a writer like George Martin, he may think about the feeling of such a scene and seek to recreate it in his own setting. And I think that's absolutely what George seems to have done with Septon Barth's reaction to Arya Targaryen, she of the grisly parasitic worm death that was a highlight of Fire and Blood. That's right. We're all sick and twisted people. And the girl who died of freaky little fireworm parasites after probably visiting Valyria was, factually speaking, one of the things we all talked about the most after Fire and Blood came out. The reason, in part, is because of that same sense of ultimate horror that Septon Barth felt. That was felt by us, the reader. It's the same feeling that we had when we saw the alien burst forth from the guy's chest. Parasites are just terrifying, plain and simple. One of my least favorite things to think about. And when they go from like tapeworms to xenomorphs and facehuggers and Arya's worms, I mean, this sears itself into the brain, right? That's what I'm trying to say. So here's the passage, and this comes right after Arya's eyes burst open from the internal heat of her condition as she's basically being cooked alive. Here goes. I thought that that was the most hideous thing that I should ever see, but I was quickly disabused of the notion, for a worse horror was awaiting me. That came when Bennifer and I lowered the poor child into a tub and covered her with ice. The shock of that immersion stopped her heart at once, I tell myself. If so, that was a mercy, for that was when the things inside her came out. The things, mother have mercy, I do not know how to speak of them. They were worms with faces, snakes with hands, twisty, slimy, unspeakable things that seemed to writhe and pulse and squirm as they came bursting from her flesh. Some were no bigger than my little finger, but one, at least, was as long as my arm. Oh, warrior, protect me, the sounds they made. Yikes, right? So Septon Barth's horror is palpable here. I'm sorry, not palatable. It's not palatable. It's very not palatable. It is palpable, though. It's tangible. And again, I think that almost everyone who reads this passage immediately thinks of the movie Aliens, right? That's what I thought of when I read it. I was like, cool, George did an Aliens chestburster thing, you know? Now, the other reason that Arya's story grabbed our attention, besides the raw punk rock ethos of just hopping on Valyrian the Black Dread, running away from home and kind of seeing what happens, are the implications for the mechanisms of magic of Planetos here. Those things inside Arya weren't just parasitic worms or even parasitic fireworms. They were worms with the hands and faces of humans. They're making sounds that frighten Barth, most likely because they sounded vaguely human, since they had human faces. They may have sounded like crying babies. So what's going on here? Third Eye says, please use this money for weed. No problem, man. No problem. Smoking a fair amount of it up here in the mountains of California. where the delivery service does come. Thank the Lord. So they might have sounded like crying babies. I think that's why they would have been the most horrifying, right? So these freaky little monsters may or may not be related to the actual firewyrms that inhabit the volcanoes of Valyria. I would tend to think that they're at least not the exact same species. And I actually do need to offer an apology here. I can't remember who it was, but someone suggested right after this came out that these were firewyrms. And I very obstinately declared that they couldn't be firewyrms because they have hands and faces. And that is true. They're not exactly firewyrms. Firewyrms don't have hands and faces. There are many accounts of firewyrms being encountered by the slaves in the Valyrian slave mines. We never hear about hands and faces. However, I was being very too rigid in my thinking. I do think that there is a connection to the firewyrm. So I forget who that was. We had a big Twitter thing. Wasn't super bloody, but I was too stubborn, and now I'm eating crow because your idea was good, and I do think firewyrms have something to do with this. So there you go. I do that sometimes. I'm overly resistant to something. Ball the Bard can tell you. I famously threw shade on one of her best ideas when she first pitched it to me, and now I love it. So and you live and learn. What can you say? Did I miss a super chat? No. Oh, it's just compliments for the 420 super chat. Yes, 420 and 666. Those are the ones we see the most around here. In any case. So we're talking about these worms. Like I said, I don't think they're exactly firewyrms. There may be a connection because these worms are fiery creatures. Areas, parasitic worms. They're cooking her from the inside. They die in the ice water. Barth says they were creatures of heat and fire and they did not love the ice. Oh no. So, we don't know. Maybe if they had grown up, they would have been able to breathe fire out of their human faces, but they didn't live long enough to fulfill their wormy destiny. So we'll never know. But like I said, they don't seem to be the exact same thing. Now, what I'm most interested in here are the hands and faces. Unless George just wrote this to be weird without any more thought to it than that. And I obviously don't think that's the case. Something is going on here. This doesn't seem like the natural state of any sort of stable species. With apologies to Duke Leto II, worm god, Emperor of Dune, who is actually a worm with a human head and hands. I do think George is giving a weird Dune shout out here, but that's sort of off the beaten path. So, we got a super chat from Ross Temby. Also, the reason the seasons are erratic supports your moon meteor myth. A destroyed moon in orbit would mess with the seasons for centuries or longer with irregular shaped space dust causing sporadic climate change. And, Ross, if the moons are linked to ice and fire, as magical moons might be, and as the clues support, then destroying one moon would screw up whatever sort of balance of ice and fire that there is. George has said not to think overly scientifically as far as the seasons being thrown off, right? It's not going to be a completely rational explanation. But I do think he likes to whip up magical versions of real phenomena. So a meteor falls, smoke and darkness, clouds the sky. That doesn't cause ice demons. So the meteors are magic and they were brought upon by sorcery that also produced the others. So it's a fantasy version of it, right? I have proposed in the Moons of Ice and Fire series that the moons we had were just that, moons of ice and fire, and that the one that got blown up or fractured, perhaps it's still out there somewhere, in the original Long Night was one associated with fire. And so we have an ice moon left, and the upcoming apocalypse will be the Ice Moon Apocalypse. And that's actually the title of one of my podcasts. So I'm with you there. We're on the same page. And I saw someone say Trugon. So hashtag Fagon. How's it going? Now, the thing I'm most interested, like I said, are the hands and faces. This doesn't seem to be a stable species, these worms here, okay? This seems rather something along the lines of the malformed dragon babies that Targaryens occasionally give birth to. It seems like some sort of mistake, some sort of accident. We've never heard of an animal like this. Again, with apologies to Leto II, God Emperor, Worm Emperor. And there's really no apparent reason for something like this to exist at all. If you're a worm tunneling through earth and rock, there's no evolutionary reason to have a human face. You want a worm face for that. Nature worked all this stuff already. You don't want soft exposed organs like ears and a human face. You want something tough. You want a worm face. So Yeah, I'd like to see Zoolander do that. It's instead of blue steel or Le Tigre, maybe there's worm face. Anyways, so I think you guys can probably see where I'm going with this at this point. It seems possible that these worms are something like the xenomorph from Aliens. Now, they were surely very tiny when they got inside Araya, most likely ingested in the water that she drank or something she ate while in Valyria or wherever Balerion took her. And I think it's either Valyria or Sothorios. And speaking about worm parasites in Sothorios, let me just grab this quote that I have pulled up here. There are two quotes which talk about parasitic worms in Sothorios. And I think that is a big clue here, that the worms that Araya got, there's more than one kind of parasitic worm. They're running around. I do think they're in both Sothorios and Valyria. But the point is the Valyrians came to Sothorios, and so did the Great Empire of the Dawn people, like I was saying. So let me see, where's the quote? Parasitic worms. Parasitic worms. Okay, I won't make you wait. There are two quotes that talk about parasitic worms. They're in Sothorios. They swim in the rivers, and the people that go there sometimes get them. They lay their eggs in people's skin. There's also some sort of hornets or wasps that do it too in Sothorios. So we've got multiple parasitic animals that lay eggs in your skin, just like in real life. So Natalie Smith says, internet won't let me participate. Love you and your work. Well, you got the super chat through, so you're participating. Thank you. But hey, hit me up on Twitter at the Dragon LML if you have any random questions that you want to throw at me on some other day. All right, so like I said, parasitic worms, they're in Sothorios, trust me, and they could definitely be in Valyria. Wherever Balerion took her, they were there. So probably these parasites are very tiny. They were ingested in water or food she ate. They grew inside her, obviously, and then at some point they emerge with hands and faces. And once we get past the basic freak out OMG factor, we're left to observe that these worms absolutely qualify as human-animal hybrids. The blood mages of Valyria created human-animal hybrids by mating humans and animals. But I have to wonder, did the original worm parasite that invaded Araya mate with her in the sense that it combined its DNA with her? That's what they mean by mating. You know, like when two like normal human beings have intercourse and create a baby, they're combining their DNA. That's the whole point of mating, is combining your DNA. Also, it's fun. Besides that, it's combining DNA. And so anything that combines DNA could essentially be remembered as mating. That's what I'm saying. And these worms, like I said, they have human attributes as well as worm attributes. So now imagine that these worms were indeed a species capable of combining their DNA with that of their host, just like the xenomorph. That would actually explain what we see here pretty well. It's like the worm DNA and Araya's DNA got thrown in a blender, and out came worms with hands and faces. Another time, a different toss of the dice, perhaps you get something a little different. Maybe you get worms with pot bellies and belly buttons and little itty bitty toesies, ears. I don't know. Who knows? If you kept experimenting, you might be able to get something stable, a new species that could eventually reproduce with its own kind. You'd need to be able to get the same result from multiple experiments, more than once. But the Valyrians were practicing this stuff on Gagasos for thousands of years, and we have no idea how long the Great Empire of the Dawn might have been working on something similar. So think about the mystery this way. What explains these worms with human hands and faces? Either their species always looks that way, or they mutated inside of Araya and became human-like. And when you look at it like that, I think the latter choice seems much more plausible. As I said, nature has been working on evolving the best worm faces and body features for millions of years, and the place it arrived at is distinctly not human-like. The same goes for parasitic worms. Human-like features are apparently not useful for living inside of someone's intestinal tract or body. And so, if Araya's worms weren't always wearing the hands of faces and people, then they must have combined with Araya's DNA And that means that they're a xenomorph-like creature. So there you go. Pernille Kabar says, Lovecraft wrote about women birthing snake hybrids. How did they do it? Do you remember how they did it, though? Or did Lovecraft even say? Might have just left you to wonder. All right. Okay. So if these are xenomorphs, if these worms combined with Araya's DNA, then we finally have an actual magical mechanism by which human-animal hybrids can be achieved. Imagine putting some of these worms inside a wyvern. Would they come out with wyvern faces and features? Fire-breathing worms with wings? If you tried enough times? And here's a thought. What if Araya's parasites actually did start out as young Valyrian fireworms? What if fireworms start out as little itty-bitty parasites and only come out with hands and faces if they're incubated in a human host? I don't think that's the case. I'm just throwing it out there. But, you know, it could be that Araya's worms are baby fireworms and that the fireworms themselves are the xenomorphs. The problem with that is that what are the fireworms incubating in the rest of the time? And like I said, if the fireworms needed humans to replicate every time, they would have been doing that with the slaves in the Valyrian mines all the time, and we would have heard about it. So I don't think, like I said, that the fireworms are the exact same thing. I think they're related species. We have multiple fiery creatures. The fireworms are fiery creatures. The dragons are fiery creatures. And so maybe the worms are too. And Quinn wanted me to tell you that also the sandworms of Dune do have like an internal fire. They're hot to the touch. They're said to have like a furnace inside. So even the very notion of fireworms that George is writing about may be taken straight from Dune. So Maud Mary says, I still wonder how Balerion got those huge wounds. Well, I would think that maybe there's a couple of dragons still lurking around Valyria it could have tangled with, or some other nasty creature, you know, definitely could have been. But that is pretty terrifying. Something that could, you know, I mean, the only thing that could really hurt Balerion the Black Dread would be another dragon, I would have to think. Another super chat from Atris Deny says, thinking that the meteor brought fire infection, the true god has to protect itself in cold. The fire infection gets powerful, the true god sends Long Night to balance. So I do think that there is a balancing mechanism like that. I do think that, so I'll just tell you, since we have moons of ice and fire, right? The fire moon gets hit. The black oily stone that we find, I think, is basically what happens when the meteorites hit the land and they fuse and sort of melt the bedrock and all fuses together. That's what happens when regular meteorites land, is they usually explode, they melt, they sort of vaporize all of the land around them. And so then everything sort of then accretes back together and forms new kinds of rock and glass and little nano diamonds and things like that. So I think that these meteors are pieces of the fire moon, and I do think they are toxic. And I do think that if we think about the magic of the world being some sort of ice and fire balance, this cataclysm is definitely screwing up the fire side of things. And I've even wondered if that's why all the fire magic is so shadowy in Ice and Fire. Like, all the fire magic we have is very, very both evil and associated with like the Shadow Babies and the Shadowlands of Ashai and the Shadowbinders. So it almost like, if you guys are familiar with Wheel of Time, they divide magic into male and female halves. And because of the great cataclysm 3,000 years ago, the male side of the magic is tainted, and all the male magicians go crazy at, like, you know, puberty or something. So it could be something that George is borrowing and saying, well, the fire side of magic is screwed up because of the Long Night disaster. But the ice side is screwed up too, because we have those alien like others with star eyes and otherworldliness and whatever else. And so there's, you know, whatever happened with the fire side must have caused a reaction. There's definitely a balancing mechanism between ice and fire here. So, and like I said, could be an oily black stone at the heart of winter causing some of this evil. So getting back to the people, the women who gave birth to snake deities or snake hybrid offspring in Lovecraft, she was cursed by Ig, the snake god, and I'm familiar with Ig. So yeah, we don't have the actual mechanism given, just some sort of dark magic. That's what I thought. So even if Araya's worms didn't start off as baby fireworms, which again, I don't think they did, we must say that they are at least similar. Like I mentioned, they are creatures of fire. They're living in Valyria, probably, and it's basically a fiery worm parasite. That much we can say for sure. Another possibility is that these worms are only one piece of the xenomorph picture, meaning Araya's type of worm could be merely one result of Valyrian experimentation, and that there could be other types of creatures which can mix their DNA with other creatures in a similar way. When plants or animal breeders are breeding, they don't just do it once, after all, but rather again and again and again, over many generations, selecting the specimens with the desired traits to breed again, and they eliminate the ones that they don't like. The Valyrians had centuries and millennia to experiment with the stuff, and so did the Great Empire of the Dawn. So it's hard to put together the whole picture. So while it's hard to put together the whole picture from the little bits of information that we have, these worms are tantalizing. I think my main point is that Araya's worms point to the possibility that this technology, if you will, parasites that can combine their DNA with that of their host, does exist in A Song of Ice and Fire, and that opens up a lot of possibilities for creating hybrid creatures. Yes, it does. So that's some freaky stuff, huh, guys? I promised freaky stuff. That's freaky stuff. That's as freaky as I can possibly think. And in Crowfood's daughter's video, she actually, working off of a tip from Quinn on a video that Quinn made about Araya's worms, they look at the Red Death, which is a plague that happened on Sothorios right after the doom of Valyria, 77 years afterwards. And the Red Death plague is kind of like a less advanced version of Araya's condition they're proposing, because the Red Death, it causes them to bleed out of every orifice, and the skin sloughs off almost as if it had been burned. And so Araya, she has the potential fire resistance of the Valyrian people. And so she was able to survive those worms much longer than any other human being would. And by the way, George has said, just in case everyone's not clear, George has said that while the Targaryens are not fire immune, they do have a higher resistance to heat than normal people. And so it's definitely the case. We see it with Araya. Her eyeballs burst from her internal heat, and still she isn't dead yet. So her body temperature is way higher than the 108 to 115 that a human body can withstand, even for a short time. The skin turns to pork crackling. Instead of burning and sloughing off, Crowfood's daughter points out that it hardens, turns leathery. So it's almost like her skin is trying to acclimate to the heat and trying to accommodate the firewyrms. And every orifice is absolutely a disturbing phrase. Another disturbing phrase is nether lips. And that's the one that George has Septon Barth use when he says that smoke was coming from every orifice of Araya, including her nether lips. I don't know why that had to be in there, but it's in there. So yes, the point is the lizard men could be failed experiments. That's exactly right. So when you look at all these experiments, the idea is that if the worms were used to combine human and animal DNA, or to combine wyvern and dragon DNA, then you've got sorry, I'm getting chastised for my use of, no, I won't say it. Nether lips. Okay. So yeah, so the whole point is that this is an experimental process. They would be doing it over and over and over, coming up with all kinds of different weird human animal worm hybrids, trying to get certain results, or dragon or worm wyvern hybrids trying to get different results. And some of the failed things that they didn't want might have been viable species. And so that maybe, and I would even say probably, is where you get winged men, eyeless men, lizard men. These are probably failed attempts to create the blood of the dragon, to combine the blood of the dragon, dragon reptilian DNA and human DNA. That is the idea here. I'm not responding to anything in the chat right now at all. And yes, not at all. In fact, guys, let me just Bob the Bard's like, go to your room and think about what you've done. 421 watching. Is there? I'm showing 386, but perhaps my thing is delayed. All right. In any case, all right. So let's keep the program going here. So let's talk symbolism. You guys know me. I love the mythical astronomy. The cool thing about Araya's worms is that it mirrors the basic mythical astronomy scenario. All right. So check this out. Let's think about the original sun, comet, and moon scenario that mirrors Azor Ahai, Lightbringer, and Nissa Nissa. So just to recap real quickly, the sun, which is like Azor Ahai, sends its comet seed or its comet sword, depending on how you want to think about this, which stands in for Lightbringer, into the moon. That's the impregnation or the stabbing act. And then the moon, like a stone womb, if you will, like an egg, explodes in dragon meteor childbirth. The dragons poured forth from the moon. The meteors came out of the exploding moon. So the whole idea of the sun stabbing the moon with a comet sword is analogized to the idea of impregnation. And that's where the dragons come from, the moon meteor dragons. Now, the big key to understanding this stuff is the connection between the dragons coming from the moon and the meteors coming from the lunar cataclysm, like I was saying. The dragons fly and breathe fire. Comets fly and breathe fire. It's easy to understand, bloody. But of course, like I said, the comets and the meteors, which do the stabbing or the impregnating, they're also kind of like starseed or like sperm or like a parasitic worm. So in this context, we have to say that moons, they're not very dragon or worm-like, right? The moon is like the egg. It is like the host body, if you will. It's the comet that is like the parasite that gets inside of the person here. So let me just skip ahead here. So now imagine Araya, right? Araya is like the moon. She gets the worms inside her, or possibly even just one to start with, just like the moon gets the comet inside of it, if you will. Then the worms multiplied, grew, combined with Araya's DNA. They cooked her from within and then burst out of her. But they were kind of like her children because they were made from her genes. So they were part worm and part human. Just like the moon meteors were part meteor and part moon. They were like its comet parent because meteors look like comets. But of course, they were actually made of pieces of moon. From the Earth, it would look like one fiery worm got inside the moon, infested it, and multiplied within. And then thousands of fiery worm children subsequently burst forth, just as with Araya. So my point here is that the basic dragons come from the moon mythical astronomy pattern can be seen as a good match for the xenomorph worm theory. It really only works if you're thinking about this like a xenomorph. If the parasites just got in her and burst out, that's one thing. But the important thing about this whole thing is that when the comet hits the moon, it combines with the moon, and the children are part comet, part moon. They drank the fire of the sun, but they're pieces of moon. So it's part daddy, part mommy. And that's why this xenomorph thing is a perfect match, because it's actually a combination of the two DNA. So, all right, there you go. That's pretty weird. So now, getting away from the symbolism, going back to the raw mechanics here, let's talk about a couple of these scenes which I think intentionally evoke the symbolism, not the symbolism, the feel of Aliens, the movie Aliens. Sorry. So let's consider for a moment the Targaryen custom of placing a dragon's egg in the cradle with their babies and young children. And this comes from Fire and Blood. There were more dragons than ever before as well, and several of the she-dragons were regularly producing clutches of eggs. Not all of these eggs hatched, but many did, and it became customary for the fathers and mothers of newborn princelings to place a dragon's egg in their cradles, following a tradition that Princess Rhaena had begun many years before. The children so blessed invariably bonded with the hatchlings to become dragon riders. So now think about this whole scene in light of Aliens, right? You have a large egg from which a monstrous lizard creature is waiting to hatch, and a small defenseless child right there when it does. Very like the xenomorph egg next to a human that's like, plastered up against the wall, helpless. Now, usually the dragon egg doesn't, the dragon doesn't hatch from the egg and then eat the baby or inject it with the parasitic spawn of Satan. But it does remind us of the Aliens setup with an egg set to hatch right next to a helpless human. And then, of course, there was that one time we talked about earlier, which sure reads differently when you think about facehuggers and xenomorph eggs. So let's read it one more time. The first omen of the dark times to come was seen on Driftmark when the dragon's egg presented to Lena Valyrian upon her birth quickened and hatched. Her parents' pride and pleasure quickly turned to ash, however. The dragon that wriggled from the egg was a monstrosity, a wingless worm, maggot white and blind. Within moments of hatching, the creature turned upon the babe in her cradle and tore a bloody chunk from her arm. As Lena shrieked, Lord Oakenfist ripped the dragon off her, flung to the floor, and hacked it to pieces. So yikes, right? This definitely reminds us of Aliens now. The deformed dragon was worm-like, and of course the aliens are very worm-like, and it popped out of the egg and then attacked the helpless human right next to it. So this was a deformed dragon and not a parasitic worm, of course. However, if we sort of combine these two similar scenes, the one with Lena and with Araya, you sort of get the entire alien picture. So just imagine for a second that the deformed white worm dragon hatchling that hatched in Princess Lena's cradle was one of those Araya parasitic worms. Then it would have been a complete alien facehugger situation with the worm thing hatching out of the egg and then infesting the host next to it. So George is playing with these parts of the alien sequence and just sort of cutting them up. But I think this is what he's trying to evoke. The question is he simply playing with the idea, or is he really trying to get us to think about the mechanics of the facehuggers and the xenomorphs? I think it's the latter, obviously, as I've said, because this is the best theory that explains what's going on with these damn, worms. And yes, I listened to Tool, Mastodon, not so much. Gojira, I've heard a little bit. They're pretty cool. And I actually want to listen to more of them. Thanks for reminding me. All right. Sorry, I just randomly see things in the chat and answer them sometimes. And Ball the Bard says, the dragon eggs in the cradles mirrors Danny holding up the eggs to her pregnant belly and calling them brothers. Oh, yeah, that's another clue, isn't it? That like the baby in Danny's womb is the Targ babies are related to the dragons, and of course Danny's baby comes out dragon-like too. Okay, so now fortunately, I skipped a bit. So now the thing to remember is that we get both this story of Lena and the little worm dragon that bit her when it hatched, and Araya's story. They both come in Fire and Blood. So it seems like something that George is trying to garner in here to explain the specifics of how the dragons were created and how the Valyrians came to possess the blood of the dragon. It may be something he just thought of recently, or it may be, Pussifer is awesome. I love Pussifer. That's a Maynard James Keenan from Tool's Side Act, by the way. Pussifer, they're friggin' awesome. I listen to them a ton. So check this out. We're going to do some more symbolism here. Let's imagine, go back to Lena, the baby that was bitten by the white worm thing that hatched. Let's pretend that this is a symbolic worm infestation, that was a parasitic worm, that George is trying to show us the scenario through symbolism here. So she gets bitten by the worm, then she becomes a dragon rider. So is maybe George trying to imply that these worms are the key to becoming dragon riders? And is it possible that if things had gone differently for Araya, that she might have been able to bond with those worms instead of dying? Because after all, there were no Valyrian blood mages around, right? We know that sorcery is Oh, Jesus. Quinn's. Yes, this is, you may recognize the Ideas of Ice and Fire chair. This is also the Ideas in Fire, Ice and Fire green screen behind this image. But I'm not getting out of the chair, you bastard. Thanks for the super chat, though. All right. Let's see. How can I prove this real quickly? What can I hold up? Here. It's Quinn's microphone. See? Recognize that? Yeah. Quinn's shoe too, sitting right on the floor. Well, somebody sold him on Adidas Boost. Wonder who that was. Thumbs pointing at this guy. All right. Anyways. So fortunately for Lena, like I said, she survived. But let's imagine that this is a worm infestation scenario. Okay. So like I said, think about Araya. And I'm sorry, I'm backtracking here. But think about Araya, all right? She cooked from the inside. Like I said, she was able to survive longer than a normal human would because she's the blood of the dragon, because Targaryens have a little bit of extra heat resistance. That kind of makes them the ideal incubators, right? Because they, like, these worms were able to grow larger and longer inside her body because she was able to live longer. Inside a normal human, they wouldn't. And I realized I broke off mid train of thought with the Gagasos thing. I need to go back and finish that thought. But the point is, Araya is the ideal host because any Blood of the Dragon person is the ideal host. So part of the point of the Targaryens' fire resistance, or the way it may have come up, may have been because they're using these fiery Dracomorph worms to mutate all the DNA and stuff. And so imagine that instead of Septon Barth sitting there when Araya shows up with these worm parasites, what if it had been a Valyrian blood mage that could have performed sorcery, to sort of make this work, right? To sort of make allow Araya to able to successfully bond with the worms and not die. Like I said, her skin was starting to harden up and toughen up as if it would be able to withstand the heat. And I was laughing because Justin Curl said next LML will be wearing a fedora with doggy tooth holes. That fedora has been buried. Quinn does have another one. I'm not going to wear it though. That would incur the wrath of Quinn. No one can wear the fedora except for Quinn or his dog's teeth. Anyways. So if there was a Valyrian blood mage around, perhaps Araya could have bonded with the worm and not died. And then she maybe would have been a person that could have bonded with dragons, or someone whose children could have bonded with dragons. If you can stabilize her existence to the point where she's, human. And again, this tons of God Emperor of Dune stuff going on here, because as you know, or as you may not know, actually, not only does Duke Leto II become a worm emperor with basically just a living worm with hands and a face, he becomes that way by allowing these baby worms to like bond with his skin and combine their worm DNA with his, and he becomes a worm being. And then when he finally dies, he like disintegrates into a bunch of worms that then like swim out into the desert. So, yeah. Matt DeSario. Sorry. There's a conversation going on here that I don't understand. I won't try to unravel it. I'm glad you guys are having fun, though. All right, so perhaps with a little bit of magic assistance, she could have survived the worm bite, right? Now, so going back to Lena and the idea that Lena, bitten by the white worm dragon, is a symbolic parallel. She survives the worm bite and then grows up to be a dragon rider, right? Check this out. She dies in childbirth, giving birth to Daemon Targaryen's deformed lizard baby, almost as if George is wanting to imagine that Lena is infected with the worm DNA. So listen to this. A day and a night of labor left Lena Valyrian pale and weak, but finally she gave birth to the son Prince Daemon had so long desired. But the babe was twisted and malformed and died within the hour, nor did his mother long survive him. Her grueling labor had drained all of Lady Lena's strength, and grief weakened her still further, making her helpless before the onset of childbed fever. After 3 days of delirium, Lady Lena passed from this mortal coil. She was but 27. During her final hour, it is said, Lady Lena rose from her bed, pushed away the septas praying over her, and made her way from the room, intent on reaching Vagar, that she might fly one last time before she died. Her strength failed her on the tower steps, however, and it was there she collapsed and died. So the interesting thing is that this scene is very evocative of Araya when she landed on Dragonstone on Balerian's back, being infected with the worms. She collapsed right onto the stone, getting off the dragon. And here we have Lena collapsing on the stone, trying to get on the dragon. It's, just kind of interesting in terms of symbolism. And like I said, the fact that Lena gives birth to a deformed lizard baby implies maybe Martin is trying to show us, again, this sort of implied line of worm transmission. And you might think I'm reaching here, but this gets a lot worse as I go. So now think about this. Araya's worms are kind of like her children, right? Because they combine with her DNA. Well, Lena has a worm child. So you kind of see how this parallel goes. They're both bitten by a worm, and then they give birth to worm children. So fairly parallel. Now, like I said, it gets worse. Lena's husband was Daemon Targaryen, the one who fathered Lena's deformed Targ baby. He rode a dragon called the Bloodworm. That's right, the Bloodworm. It's a name that's highly suggestive of a parasitic worm, a worm that swims inside of your blood, in your body. And perhaps there's an implication of a worm that alters someone's bloodlines to be like a dragon, because the Bloodworm is a dragon. That's pretty good. Even better, it wasn't just Lena that Daemon fathered a deformed Targ baby on. His third wife, Rhaenyra, also gave birth to one as well. Again, as if Martin is implying Daemon as someone who carries the bloodworm, who carries the worm parasite. And so he fathers worm children. So it says, on Dragonstone, no cheers were heard. Instead, screams echoed through the halls and stairwells of Sea Dragon Tower, down from the queen's apartments where Rhaenyra Targaryen strained and shuddered in her third day of labor. The child had not been due for another turn of the moon, but the tidings from King's Landing had driven the princess into a black fury, and her rage seemed to bring on the birth, as if the baby inside her were angry too and fighting to get out. Again, think of aliens, the chestbursters here. The princess shrieked curses all through her labor, calling down the wrath of the gods upon her half-brothers and their mother, the queen, and detailing the torments that she would inflict upon them before she would let them die. She cursed the child inside her too, Mushroom tells us, clawing at her swollen belly as Maester Gerardus and her midwife tried to restrain her, and shouting, "Monster, monster, get out, get out, get out!" When the babe at last came forth, she proved indeed a monster, a stillborn girl, twisted and malformed, with a hole in her chest where her heart should have been, and a stubby, scaled tail. Or so Mushroom describes her. The dwarf tells us that it was he who carried the little thing to the yard for burning. All right. So once again, this reminds us of aliens. There's a monster inside her fighting to get out. Her terror and anger at the monster trying to fight its way out kind of matches a scene from Aliens, to be honest. And again, the baby is lizard-like and malformed. So, one other note on Daemon, father of 2 deformed Targ worm babies. Another of his love interests was a woman in King's Landing named Mysaria the White Worm. Worms everywhere. Daemon bonded with a worm dragon, made love to a worm woman, and had 2 worm children. So it feels like Martin could be telling us a story here. And I should probably point out that Daemon Targaryen is an outstanding Azor Ahai Bloodstone Emperor parallel. He declared himself Emperor of the Steps, King of the Stepstones, King of the Narrow Sea, set up his royal seat on the island of Bloodstone in the Stepstones. He was a Bloodstone king, a dragon king. The Bloodstone Emperor was said to practice necromancy and all kinds of dark arts. And of course, I've looked at the Valyrian culture as sort of picking up where the Bloodstone Emperor left off. Slavery. Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead here. Point is, it's very possible that this blood of the dragon, human-animal hybrid stuff could originate with the Bloodstone Emperor And I mean, that's the whole premise of this picture. and yeah, so the worm, the parasitic Dracomorph worm, as presented to you by the Bloodstone Emperor and his demon cohorts. That's what we're trying to communicate here. So there's an interesting link that Amanda and I both noticed concerning the two mothers of Daemon's lizard babies, Rhaenyra and Laena, and other targs with lizard babies. They're all tied to Maegor the Cruel. So Laena rode Vhagar, who was originally Queen Visenya's mount, and Rhaenyra named her deformed lizard baby Visenya. Visenya, of course, is rumored to have used sorcery to conceive Maegor. Maegor, well, 3 moons before she was due, Queen Jane was brought to bed by a sudden onset of labor pains and was delivered of a stillborn child as monstrous as the one Alice Haraway, another one of Maegor's wives, had birthed, a legless and armless creature possessed of both male and female genitalia. Hey, let's not slander hermaphrodites with being like legless and armless monstrosities, George. Come on. But in any case, so nor did the mother long survive the child. Maegor was cursed, men said. He had slain his nephew, made war against the faith in the High Septon, defied the gods, committed murder and incest, adultery and rape. Sounds like the Bloodstone Emperor, right? His privy parts were poisoned, his seed full of worms. The High Septon says, the gods would never grant him a living son, or so the whispers ran. Maegor himself settled on a different explanation and sent Owen Bush and Sir Meladon Moore to seize Queen Tyenna and deliver her to the dungeons. There, the Pentoshi queen made a full confession, even as the king's torturers readied their implements. She had poisoned Jane Westerling's child in the womb, just as she had Alice Haraway's. It would be the same with Eleanor Costain's whelp, she promised. I, for one, don't think. Thank you. Baldebard says the nomenclature is intersex. Yes, thank you. I said the wrong word there. But the point is, what's up with that, George? Come on, man. In any case, I don't believe this. I think this is slander of Tyenna because we have ample evidence that the Targaryens produce deformed lizard babies. So there's no need for Tyenna's sorcery, for that to happen. Now, it could be that if Tyenna was working sorcery on Maegor's children, that's what happens. They revert to the lizard DNA. So it can't rule it out. But all I'm saying is that there isn't a reason. There isn't a reason for it. There isn't a need for it. So, all right. So it's the point is, the moon turned and turned again, and in the black of night, Queen Eleanor too was delivered of a malformed and stillborn child, an eyeless baby born with rudimentary wings. So Maegor, born of sorcery, has wormy seed, and the women infected with his wormy seed give birth to monsters, with the first really looking like a worm, armless and legless. Daemon Targaryen was infected with the blood worm, so to speak, and he gave birth to lizard babies. And I find it very interesting that both Maegor and his wives, and Daemon and his wives, it almost seems like Martin is hinting at the idea of worms being transmitted through bloodlines, ones that cause strange hybrid offsprings of humans and dragons, or worms. So there you go. You have the symbolic sort of patterning that you guys know my podcast for, which supports the sort of logical analysis of the evidence that we're seeing with the human-animal hybrids. And all of it points to Dracomorph. That's what I think is going on. So I think at the end of the day, I've got 2 solid conclusions here. Martin is at the very least evoking the feel of aliens with the Araya worm scene and with Laena Valerian's deformed dragon worm that bit her, and with Rhaenyra's monster baby trying to fight its way out of her. And 2, unless the species of worms that invaded Araya's body always had hands and faces, which seems unlikely, then they combined with her DNA, and that makes them Dracomorphs and opens up an entire Pandora's box for the magical combination of different species through the use of nasty worm parasites. It's disgusting and horrifying, which in my opinion makes it altogether satisfying as a nuts and bolts explanation of just what dark places the Valyrians and before them, the Great Empire of the Dawn, went to complete their blood magic experiments. All right. And that is the horrifying script that I have had for you today. We've got about 15 minutes left. So if you have any questions that you asked me that I missed earlier while I was in my stream of narration there, feel free to repeat them here and I'll try to grab them, or you can throw a super chat, make sure I see it. Let's see. Super important question. Ryan Colligan says, do you think dragons always require human intervention to hatch their eggs, or can they breed independently? I think once created, they definitely can breed independently, because they seem to be growing wild in a shy, and they seem to have spread wild around the world too. This is something that I didn't mention. The Maesters say that dragon bones have been found all over the world. Ib, Sothorios, Westeros. There's ancient tales of dragons in Westeros. So it seems like at some point the dragons did spread on their own. And that's kind of the thing. Like if you can create a hybrid species, if you can crossbreed, like two different types of dog or, whatever, unless you get occasionally you get a donkey, the mule, right? The horse and a donkey create a mule. The mule can't reproduce. But if you can create hybrids that can reproduce, then you can do generations and generations of experiments and stuff. So, yeah, I mean, intersex definitely sounds a lot better than hermaphrodite, as far as just like, the whole point of updating language is dignity. A lot of times old words carry connotations that have shame attached, negative, connotations and stuff. So we change the words, we update the words to be more accurate and to convey dignity onto people, because all people should have dignity. And thank you again for your input, everyone. So let's see here. Is it accepted that dragons were created by man? Well, you tell me. Do you accept it? I do. I was of the belief that dragons were natural creatures that were tamed and later experiments were done on them. I used to think that, but Crowfood's daughter changed my mind. I think all of these deformed babies really do show, and the deformed dragon especially. That's, I think, what changed my mind is that white worm dragon that bit Lane of Valyrian, because that is a dragon hatched from an egg showing us worm sign, if you will. Worms detect all rhythmic vibrations. And that, to me, the only explanation is that dragons and worms are related. So that's what I would say. What if it was the Bloodstone Emperor and not the Great Empire of the Dawn who created dragons? This is possible. So I favor the idea that the Great Empire of the Dawn did create the dragons, and that the Bloodstone Emperor may have taken the dragons and changed their use. He may have used them, monstrously to conquer. But maybe the Great Empire of the Dawn did that too. It's not a hard line between the Great Empire of the Dawn as this great, wonderful place, and then the evil Bloodstone Emperor. We're told there was a gradual descent and a corruption. So it's hard to separate the actions of the Bloodstone Emperor and the actions of the Great Empire of the Dawn as far as who created the Dragon Bond, who did the Fused Stone. It's possible the Bloodstone Emperor did it all, that he took over and created the Dragon Bond and then made the Fused Stone that we find. And it all happened during his lifetime. Perhaps his lifetime was extended. But I tend to think that it was, you have to blame the entire Great Empire of the Dawn just because of the time needed, to spread out and become an empire and found a colony on Battle Isle in Westeros. That all says to me they were around for a long time working on this stuff. Do you think fire magic was used to reinforce Valyrian blood to combine with the dragon blood? Well, I think that sorcery was used, and all Valyrian sorcery is rooted in blood and fire. So there's two, if we're looking for extra sources of magical power to sort of use in this process, the thing I think about is the black stone, the oily black stone, because the oily black stone, we find it near the hybrids. Like I said, it's in Sothorios in two places. Sothorios is full of hybrids. It's associated with the deep ones in a couple places, Isle of Toads. So I think that it's possible. The oily black stone, well, it's more than possible. It's almost certain that the oily black stone is magically toxic and that it has effects. Like at Yin, the jungle won't grow near the stone. And at Ashai, there's no plants or animals or babies, besides ghost grass. And so it's all like, it's very toxic. So it's possible that that stuff has magical effects that can be harnessed and used. That makes sense. And in fact, I've even wondered if the oily black stone or the meteorite stone might be the missing ingredient in making Valyrian steel that the Cohoric smiths are missing, because the Cohoric smiths are doing everything else right, except for they don't have dragons. So that's the other thing. Obviously, you could need actual dragon flame to rework it, but I wonder if maybe the oily black stone is part of all that, because the Valyrians, again, they established this colony at Gagassos early on. It's right next to the Isle of Toads, where we have the oily black stone. So, yeah. There's lots of links between the oily black stone and dragons. So it could be a source of magical power. Yeah, like radiation, exactly. Would I wear a crown of oily black stone? That would not be smart. And what also would not be smart is to sit in a giant chair made of oily black stone every day, year after year. That might corrupt you, make you go insane, make you worship eldritch, deep ones gods, things like that. Yes. Food for thought, isn't it? Even the quote where Theon sees Balon Greyjoy the first time after 9 years, it goes on for several sentences about how haggard Balon looks. And Theon's like, man, it hasn't been that long. He looks so old and haggard. So maybe I wondered if maybe the Sea Stone chair's effects are like actually wearing him down, making him into like a Grey King, So the thing I think is the most interesting is the idea that the heat tolerance of the Valyrians indicates that they are the perfect hosts for these worm parasites. So that really, 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 really suggests that is either the point or the way that the Targaryens got fire immunity is so that they could be the hosts for these freaky experiments. So you wonder if like maybe the Valyrians weren't the top dog in the Great Empire of the Dawn. They could have been the subjugated people, the experiment people, the slave colony people that the Bloodstone Emperor, they could have been created just for this process. And then after the Great Empire of the Dawn collapsed, the freaky slave experiment people that were made for this stuff, find their independence. And they're like, well, no, we can ride dragons actually. And we're going to use that to take power. So, Mod Mary, did I miss a super chat? Let's not do that. Yes, I did. Thank you, Mod Mary. And thank you guys for being patient and reminding me when I miss a super chat and not immediately turning your hearts against me. I appreciate that. I have ADD and I miss things a lot. So I really appreciate that, Grace, and I appreciate all the super chats. Is there an equal and opposite thing going on with the ice part of this story? Maybe with the mixing of the Ice Queen with the Stark men? Yes, of course, Mod Mary. I have the Blood of the Other series. I think you were teeing that one up for me. Thank you. The Blood of the Other series, which you can find on my YouTube channel, suggests exactly that the Starks contain others' DNA. And there's a very simple mechanism for that. We see Sam and Gilly steal a baby that was supposed to be given to the others, right? All of Craster's male sons are promised to the others. But instead, that baby is taken. And it's not turned into another. And one of the things they talk about doing with Baby Monster is giving it to Jon to foster at Winterfell so it can be raised there with Jon's legitimate Stark children when they are talking about that. So, the parallel is, imagine the original Night's King. Night's King and Queen were said to be sacrificing to the others, which means they were giving their children to the others or turning their children into others. And so if one of those babies was rescued, just like one of Craster's kids were rescued, and we always look for those parallels, then you have a baby being taken from the others and potentially raised as a Stark. And the cool parallel for this is at the Tower of Joy, where Ned, who's a very last hero type figure, he fights against 3 Kingsguard. And of course, the Kingsguard Knights, as you guys know from my Moons of Ice and Fire series, the Kingsguard are very strong parallels for the White Walkers. They have all the same descriptions: snow white, ghostly armor, pale shadow this. ghostly in the moonlight, yada, 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 white swords. And so, let's see, what was I saying? Yeah, so Tower of Joy, Ned is like the last hero. He's fighting against these symbolic Kingsguard others. He defeats them, and then what does he do? He takes home a baby and raises it as a Stark, and that's Jon Snow, the baby of ice and fire. Jon Snow's mother is a symbolic Night Queen person. She's Lyanna of the Blue Winter Rose. Doesn't mean she's evil. Night Queen might not have been evil, for all we know. But it does make her an ice moon maiden, as I like to say. It fits the archetype of a moon woman associated with icy symbolism. So that makes us think of Night Queen. And so you have the others guarding a Night Queen person and her magical baby. And then you have a last hero come and steal that baby after defeating the others, takes it home and raises it at Stark. So maybe that happened originally. And that would give you the Starks with the blood of the other. And I think that's absolutely the case. It makes a very cool parallel. And yeah, no apologies needed, Natalie. Super chat was good. Did I miss any others? I am scrolling back up. See if there's any others I missed. Looks like I got them all. Okay. Are the Valyrians and others basically opposites? Kind of. Not exactly, but sort of, yeah. A fire species and an ice species, yes. I mean, that's essentially what we're talking about. And they both could be results of the Bloodstone Emperor experiments, yes, because Azor Ahai, as you know, may have become the Night King, might be the father of the Night King. And so, yes, I do think all the Great Emperor of the Dawn dragon magic and the Azor Ahai stuff did lead into the creation of the others. That's a huge idea that I probably can't even go into right now. But yes, this all could go back to the same source. I saw another question I wanted to respond to. Let me look back up. Oh, yes. So Dany's, her number one lieutenant is Grey Worm, somebody pointed out. So that could be, I have to think about that more and look at the Grey Worm scenes. But that is interesting, right? It's more worm clues being placed around dragon people. There's probably something more specific there that we could find if we look at it in detail. You always have to read the scenes and look at what's going on with the wording in the given scene. Slightly off topic, will Bran be the only person to meet Lyanna? No, I think it'll be Jon, right? When he's wandering around in the crypts, astrally projecting himself, he's going to talk to Lyanna's ghost, see Rhaegar's harp, all that. We shall see, though. Obviously, Bran can see anything. I also cannot see giving slaves the power to ride dragons and not breathe that into the bloodline, perhaps with the Amethyst Empress. Well, perhaps it was an accident. Perhaps they were using the Valyrians simply as host bodies to, like, create, you know, human lizard beings and stuff. And they kept them all locked up and stuff. But at some point they got out and turned the tables and found that they could control the dragons. So, I mean, George loves that kind of stuff, right? You try one thing and it gets screwed up, and that's how we have, you know, some established new thing. So, yeah. Yes, and thank you, mods. I always forget to thank the mods. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being a great audience. It doesn't require much moderating. Don't have any trolls or meanness. You all are such great folks. And this, again, makes me feel wonderful about everything that we're doing here. Bringing folks with sharp minds and polite manners. I like that. I don't know how to change names. He's my friendly troll. He's my troll that I like. Arya eats a worm when she gets into the House of Black and White. Interpret that. You can almost hear the bitch at the end of that. But so Arya plucks the worm from the eye of the kindly man, but that's meant to mirror Bloodraven's root, his weirwood root, which is compared to a worm. And oh gosh, the weirwoods have all kinds of worm symbolism. What's going on there? I probably can't even get into that now. Probably just a parallel. I mean, I don't think you can tie the weirwoods into all this blood magic hybriding. I don't think that's the case. So it's probably different worm symbolism. But yes, please smash the like button, folks. Getting ready to wrap this up. Share it with your friends. Upvote it if you can. Do all that stuff. Make sure you subscribe to my channel. Click the notification bell. And yeah, Ball the Bard points out, yeah, she's kind of eating weirwood paste then by eating the weirwood worm. Totally, yes. So that, and then that's all the stuff with all the Arya stuff in the House of Black and White. It's tons of weirwood parallels to Bran. I mean, it's just endless weirwood parallels with the House of Black and White. So thank you, everyone. And like I said, like the video, share it far and wide. I will have new Great Empire of the Dawn video coming called Great Empire of the Dawn Westeros very soon. And in case you missed it, the last video I put out was George Martin answers my question about mythology. I sort of got into talking about archetypes and myth and how all that works. So check that out. And check out those Crowfood's daughter videos. Links in the description.